We're talking today about the art of effective listening. And it's interesting because some of you know, if you know my history, that I was actually in silence for 2 years. Not consecutively, but I did a year in 2012 and then another one in 2016. And one of the things that I probably learned the most about that time wasn't so much the listening, that was definitely part of it, but was the power of a pause. See, it does something, doesn't it? How many of you, raise a hand, felt a little bit of discomfort or anxiety? You're like, what's he doing? He's not talking. What's he going to say next? Or were there some stories, some thoughts going on in your head? So that's the thing. That's the power of the pause. And the question I actually have to you in relation to today's topic, if we're uncomfortable listening to ourselves, because that's what happens in that pause. That's what happens when we fall silent or we're in a silent space, is all of a sudden our own thoughts, our own mind, the voices inside, they start to get louder. That was one of the biggest things people ask me, like, oh, wow, so when you went silent, did it get really quiet? I'm like, no, it got so loud. Whew. The voices that I was ignoring, the voices I was repressing, the voices that I didn't want to hear, they got so loud. But the thing is, they're just there to be acknowledged, and I think that's a big piece of listening. Effective listening means actually consciously paying attention. I think half the time we're unconsciously not paying attention and even sometimes consciously trying not to pay attention. There's certain things we don't want to hear, we don't want to feel. It'll be that little whisper of truth inside you that's like, no, go do that thing you really want to do. But I need to pay my bills. But go do this. No! And so you ignore it. And that's not effective listening. Because see, the problem with that is the moment that you're not listening, what happens? It starts compounding, right? And eventually, where it was just a little whisper, it starts yelling at you, and it may come in the form of stress, it may come in tension, it may come in attracting certain negativity in your life. So this idea of effective listening. How do we first listen to ourselves? I think that's really key. Can we really drop in first and listen to ourselves? Because half the time we come to a conversation and we're not listening to ourselves, we're not listening to the other. Rather, we're listening instead to, okay, how can I leverage this? How can I use this? And how can I respond? But we're not actually listening to what's happening in that moment. So I like to say, in not just ideas of communication, but in everything in life, to have curiosity. Because curiosity takes us, hi, welcome, come on in, grab a cushion. Curiosity takes us from this idea of thinking that we know something, thinking that we have to be prepared to share something, to actually just showing up in the moment, being present. And if you're not present, how can you listen, right? So this idea of being able to drop into curiosity, now I want to make sure I make it clear what curiosity is, because there's a lot of ways we could define that, so let's have an agreement around it. There's a few different ways that we can pay attention. We have focus, we have concentration, and then we have curiosity. Focus is when, let's say, if any of you have ever gone surfing, or if you can imagine going surfing, you go down to the beach, and the surfer who focuses, he looks out onto the waves and he sees one wave, and he looks very closely at the detail of that wave. And he looks to see how it's curving and whether it's going to splash out, if it's whitewash, if it's rising. He's very focused. But if he doesn't see exactly what he wants to see, he may go, nah, it's not going to work. But that was because that wave wasn't. His focus is zooming in too far. Have you ever done that in life? Zoomed in too far into the thing that you're doing? We got to zoom out every so often, right? And then you have concentration. Now, the surfer that goes to the beach with concentration, he's going to go, and again, he's going to look at just one wave. He may not look at the details of that wave, but he'll only focus on the one wave and not see all the other waves. So that's concentration. And he'll be very, very solid in that. So concentration is almost like focus over time. How many of you have been in a conversation where you were listening with concentration? And in your head, you were probably going like, I don't get what they're saying. I don't really care. This is boring. I don't want to be here. And you're in that, you know those conversations, right? And you're sitting there, but I'm going to pay attention. But if you're paying attention with concentration, then you're actually paying attention more to the resistance in your mind and the focus over time that you're doing than the actual paying attention and listening. to what's happening with the other person. So then we finally come to curiosity. Curiosity is the surfer that goes down to the beach, gets in their wetsuit, grabs their board, and gets in the water. They get all the way in the water. They don't even look at any of the waves. They get in the water, they swim all the way out, and then they sit and they wait with curiosity. See, curiosity is to be ready and aware. There's a big difference there. You're not looking for something specific, but you're looking for whatever is going to present itself in that moment. Now imagine you take that into this idea of effective listening, and you show up in a conversation with somebody, or in a talk like this, to listen with curiosity. Where you're not sitting there going, because I have this sometimes, people will come into my talks ready to battle. It's really funny. There'll be other teachers or other people around the same sphere of field that I talk on, and they'll be like, okay, let's see what this guy's got. And they're ready with their hand I got a question, right? Now they're not curious. They walked in there thinking that they knew something. Great, they probably do, and they won't learn anything else. And I think that's the key there is effective listening means you walk into the situation, the scenario, the interaction with the openness, the empty cup you could call it, of saying, hey, I don't know what you're going to present to me. I don't know what I'm going to learn from you today. And so I come curiously. First step in effective listening, curiosity. Another step in there which kind of helps to get into that curious state, I call it put down your umbrella. And what I mean by that, when I have to backtrack a little bit. Can I tell you guys a story? All right. So when I was in my first year in silence, actually when I first came out of it, I had this epiphany. There was this awakened moment. And to be honest, it was one of, if we were going to talk kind of spiritual, metaphysical, it's one of those moments where I felt like my head had come out of the water and I'd been under this river for all my life. And everything was suddenly clear. And the beauty of that was I saw my clarity, my truth, what was aligned for me. The not so beautiful thing was my mind went, yes, this is the truth for everyone. And so I went running around trying to tell everybody, and part of that truth was that I looked out into the world, into society, and I saw what I called an umbrella society. Because what happens when it rains? What do most people do? Here in Singapore, if it rains, you can't find cover, what do? Some of you might dance in the rain. That's awesome. Most of us, though, we put an umbrella up, right? We don't want to get wet. But the rain, all it does is it comes and it washes away the facade, the mask, the roles that we've been playing, and it reveals the truth beneath. Sometimes when we're in conversation with people and we're trying to listen to each other, we have to get past the mask in order to see who's really there. But you see, here's the thing. We put up that umbrella for a reason. It's our reality. It's our safety. It's a little bubble of comfort. Now, the mistake I made when I came out of that silence, I went running around. I was thinking, I need to show people the truth. They need to see it. Give me your umbrella. Put it down. And people were freaking out. Because that umbrella was their whole identity, their reality. To take it away was like taking away themselves. So we can't do that. And I learned a ninja strategy. This ninja strategy, by the way, you'll find I do the wacha every so often. I love it. I'm a ninja at heart. As we go up to somebody to interact, first we have to put our umbrella down. That means you put your ego down. You put your idea of what you know down. And immediately in doing that, you open yourself to the curiosity of what you might learn from the other. Now the next step, this is critical and this is big in how we get to effectively listen to one another. We don't try to change the other person's reality. We wonder about it. We become curious about it. We become interested in it. And that way that works is you put your umbrella down. Now you have a little more flexibility. You can move around a little better without poking people. And you walk over and you step underneath their umbrella. And you look around. You go, oh, wow, look, I wouldn't have put the drapes over there, but they're nice. And you get an idea of their reality. It's a beautiful thing. Try this out the next time you're going to have a conversation with somebody that you know it's maybe a difficult thing to do. Sometimes family, partnerships, even a business relation, where you know it's a hard conversation, go in there not immediately with what you want to get out of it, but with a curiosity to see where they're at. You'll be amazed at what happens when you do that. See, what that is in the terms of effective listening is permission. You are giving the other person permission to be heard. And because you gave them permission to be heard, they might just give you permission to be heard. There's this magical thing that happens with permission. By the way, in all of my talks, I almost always end up bringing in three concepts: acceptance, permission, and expression. Acceptance, permission, and expression. Now, in the permission, what that means is that you permit your expression. You permit the expression of another without judgment, but with curiosity. And when you do that, there's this thing that happens with permission. It's contagious. So let's try this for a moment. Go ahead and close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, take a deep breath in. Exhale, let your shoulders relax. And if you drop your mind's eye deep inside, notice a little seed. And in that seed, there's a sprout, and it starts to grow. It starts to come up through the chest, branching out through the arms, and maybe a couple branches, some twigs, just catch the corners of your lips and start to move them upward and out. I call this a smile. It's an ancient technique. And all of a sudden, you find yourself there, and if you open your eyes for a moment and you look around, notice what happens. The smile gets bigger. That's the contagion of permission. When we give ourselves permission to drop inside, find the truth of what we really want to express, and let it come up and out, it is immediately contagious. I'll give you another example of what I mean by this. Okay, how many of you have been at a party and then they brought out the cake? And you were all over here in the comfy sofa area. The cake was brought out towards the kitchen, and kind of slowly everybody migrates. They don't go directly to it. You don't want to be obvious, right? And so you just kind of keep talking with people. You're like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden now everybody's just around the table. But nobody wants to take the first slice. That would be rude. No, it's not. You're waiting for somebody to give permission. Because the moment one person does it, the permission's there and the cake's gone. Permission is contagious. So when we come into an interaction, into a conversation with somebody, and we give them first the permission to express what's really there for them, and you ask a question, or you just come in with that open mind to see who they are. It may be that you went in there to talk about a raise in a business thing, and you walked in and you noticed something in the face of your boss, and you went, hey, how are you today? But really, how are you today? Not just an etiquette, because you were curious, you saw something. That's the curiosity, and that's the permission to have something expressed. And the beauty there is because you gave them permission, they will more likely give you permission to be heard also. I work with relationships all the time, and I do some couples therapy. And it's so funny because the couples will always come in, and almost the same thing happens every time. They'll be like, well, they're just not hearing me. I said, are you listening to them? Most of the time, no. We are so busy trying to be heard that we forget that sometimes we have to hear first. And I actually want to make a distinction here between hearing and listening, because there is a big difference. Hearing means that you got information, you got knowledge. Listening is that you understood it. Listening is that you actually tapped in and you understood what it meant for the other person. I want to make that one clear too. Notice I made that a little clearer there. You understood what it meant for the other person. A lot of times, we may not agree with what somebody else is sharing. We may not agree with somebody else's values or actions or decisions, but we need to understand their reasons for it. Or at least understand they have their reasons for it. And that, again, gives permission for people to express what's authentic and real for them. So we have these three components, right? Acceptance, permission, and expression. Let me jump back over to acceptance, because that one actually is critical. If you don't have acceptance first, the other two don't happen. Now, acceptance is a tricky one, because especially in the conscious world and communities, we often hear acceptance in kind of like a bucket throw, right? You're going through a challenge, you just need to accept that this is what's going on. No, you don't. Like, if it's challenging, if it's painful, if you're feeling trauma, no, you don't have to just accept and be okay. That's called tolerance. We confuse the two all the time. Acceptance, all it means is to recognize the reality of this moment. You don't have to like it. Most of the time, you won't. That's why you're not accepting it. But to recognize the reality, because people get into denial all the time. Here's an example. Part of the coaching procedures that I do, and this was one of the things that you experienced in the session earlier, is I mix some body work and some energy work in. And I'll do a little bit of Thai massage stretches. And sometimes I'll have a client, I'll be stretching their leg, I'll be like this, and I'll say, you can relax. They're like, yeah, I'm totally relaxed. And I let go of the leg, and it's like, denial. Most of the time, we don't even know we're in denial. Acceptance is to realize what's the reality, what's really going on for me, for this moment, for the other. You have to find your home base there, be present, because otherwise you don't know where you're starting from. Another way that I can put this, how many of you have ever ordered something from Amazon.com? Yeah? So imagine you're on Amazon, you're scrolling through the products and you're looking for that perfect thing, some resource to help you in your personal development. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's a self-help guide called Who Are You by Rodolfo Young. It's on Amazon and Kindle. And you find it, you're like, yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. And you click purchase, that's the easy part because often we'll jump right in. And you go over to the purchase page, the billing, that's your investment. That could be your time, your energy. Sometimes it's financial. But what it really is it's your willingness, right? So that, easy, you can get past that page. The third page, that is the trickiest one, shipping address. Because if you haven't accepted where you're at, you don't know where to have all those resources set. Acceptance is your home address. Acceptance is where you're actually at in that moment. As soon as you can actually figure that out and accept it, then you're there. You can order things, and funny thing is, it's instantaneous delivery. You'll hear a knock at the door. Here's the problem. If we're still in our own heads, if we haven't put our umbrellas down, if we're in our own stories and thoughts and we're not really listening to what's going on around us effectively, then instead we're going to be listening reactively. Have you guys ever done that? Especially in conversations between romantic or intimate partners or maybe family, we listen reactively all the time because we went in there with shields and armor. Instead of vulnerably, you put your umbrella down. So we get to walk in there vulnerably, and in doing that, what that means is that you actually open the door, right? You fully open the door, the windows, the curtains, anything that you closed up in your home where you finally at least accepted that's where you were at, but you closed everything up to protect yourself. Maybe it's because at some point in your childhood there was a trauma, and that trauma could be something as simple as your mom left the room to get something, you felt you were abandoned. It can also be much grander things. But whatever it is, in those moments of trauma, we put a brick into a wall, and then another brick, and another brick, and another brick, and all of a sudden we had this big concrete wall, and then a brick wall, and then an electric fence, and then a moat, and then a bridge, and then we brought in the dragons to make sure that nobody could get anywhere near us. And the whole time, we wished that somebody would come by. Because we got lonely. And the other thing that happens with that, and why we often are looking so much for validation outside of us, is because when we look inside of us, we don't see enough. And we think to ourselves, I'm not worthy. I need this other person to hear me, to know what it is I can really offer so that they'll say I'm worthy. They'll validate and acknowledge me. But here's the problem. The reason you're not worthy has nothing to do with what somebody else or an external influence can do. It has everything to do with the fact that you divided yourself up. You distributed your energy into all sorts of different places. Maybe it was in those little pockets of validation. Maybe it was in some traumas of your life, and mostly it's in the protections. You put like 70 or 80% of your defensive energy, your identity, into your walls. So you look back and there's only like 30, 20%, and you're like, I'm not enough. Now let's think about that. What's going to be the 20, 30% that you're going to lock away down deep somewhere where nobody ever gets to look at it? Is it the really great stuff about you? Is it your strengths, your vibrancy, your bright light? No, right? It's going to be the dark stuff, the shadows, the things you judge that you don't want anybody else to see. So now you look back, you only see 20%, and you're like, that's crap. Damn it. And so then we focus externally, trying to have people see us for our mask, which is our protections, instead of for who we really are. So effective listening, we have to do some work before we actually enter the interaction. And that work is to listen to yourself first. To go down deep inside, acknowledge all the pieces of you, even the ugly ones, the pieces you've been judging, and look at it and go, oh, that's just a fragment of who I am. So I think that's the problem, is what we do is we listen to something else that somebody else says, or we listen to even the pieces of ourselves that are expressing, or even a thought that comes by. We're like, oh my God, I can't believe I thought that. It was so bad. But that wasn't all of you. And the problem is we often think it is. You see, then you're in a focused mindset or concentrating. You're not curious. You're thinking, oh my God, I thought about stealing that chocolate cake while nobody was looking. I'm a bad person. No, you had a momentary desire and a thought about stealing. If you acted on it, good, you had some chocolate cake, great. So we have to recognize that it's just a fragment, right? A tiny, tiny little lens of a piece, maybe a facet of a multifaceted diamond that is really who you are. But you won't see the rest unless you're curious. So curiosity, you get very curious about yourself. You effectively listen to, who am I? By the way, that's my other book. The first one was, who are you? I didn't plan that one. That worked out. And you start to notice who that is. And then from that place, because you're confident then, confidence coach right here. Because you're confident then, you can walk into a situation, an interaction, and a communication with somebody, not seeking their validation or them seeing you, but rather coming in service and saying, hey, I'm here to see you. I'm here to listen. I'm here to really understand where you're coming from. It changes the whole dynamic. Presence without agenda. Presence without agenda. Curiosity has no agenda other than an interest. That's it. It's not trying to change anything because it doesn't think it knows better. It's curious. A little earlier, I said something about a question and being able to approach people with questions. Now, there's a distinction I like to make about questions because there's a real question and then there's a confirmation. A lot of times we approach people looking for confirmations, not questions. Confirmation means you already think you know what the possible answers are. A real question comes from curiosity. You have no clue what it is. Many of us will go up to somebody and be like, hey, how are you? And they'll be like, purple. And you're like, what? That doesn't make sense because you were expecting a certain range of answers that were appropriate. You were just looking for confirmation. If they said, oh, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm sad, you're like, okay, I can check that one off. Thank you. Okay, next. Right? Whereas a curious question has no answer. It doesn't seek an answer. It seeks deepening with interest. I'll give you an example. Do any of you have a question in your mind right now? In the moment that I asked it, there was a question that you asked, right, in your mind. That was a real question. That was a curious question because you didn't know the answer. A lot of times the curious question will cause a pause. Do you remember what I said earlier at the very beginning of this talk? One of the greatest facets and tools that we can have, skills that we can have in effective listening is the knowledge and ability to pause. When you ask a question, it creates the pause. Now, you don't always have to ask the question outwardly. You can be in a connection with somebody, communicating, and they might be saying something that you didn't quite get, and you might just say, I wonder what they really want. I wonder what's really going on here. I wonder how I could really serve, but from a truly compassionate, curious place. And there will be a pause. Have you talked to people, or maybe you're guilty of this yourself, where if you don't think that somebody's going to be willing to listen to you, willing to take the time, because maybe you're asking something of them, that you talk really fast? You figure maybe if I get it all out there as fast as possible, they won't know what came at them. I see this with people all the time when they're talking to me or when I see them talking to other people. They will speak a mile a minute and you have no idea what they're even asking for, but they are trying to ask for something. My clients do it all the time. And most of the time, all they're talking is their story. And here's what a story is. A story is something people think they have to tell in order to ask for permission to be heard. And the one thing that all of us ever want to be heard in is what it is that we want. That's it. At some level, we just want to be able to ask people around us or to express, this is what I want in life. Whether that be a feeling or an action or a connection, you just want to ask, this is what I want. Everybody else is doing it too. And so to be effective in your listening is to ask that question. What do you really want? Now, if you ask that directly to the person, most of the time, as happens with me with my clients, I'll say, what do you want? They're like, well, I don't want to struggle anymore, and I don't want to stress anymore, and I don't want to have financial issues anymore, and I go, those are all the don'ts. What do you want? And they're lost. So you may not be able to ask it directly to people, but you can ask it within your own mind. And then all of a sudden, you're going to listen with a different kind of curiosity. You will notice things that you wouldn't have noticed before. You will see what's behind all the talk and story that somebody might be sharing with you. This acute awareness starts to give you a lot more information about the interaction that you're in. And so whether this is in a personal or professional interaction, you can suddenly become aware of so much more that's going on for that person. I had a teacher once, he used to say that the bigger the front, the bigger the back.
The bigger the what?
The bigger the front, the bigger the back. And what that means is the more somebody's expressing a certain way, like exaggerated, you can tell it's not just natural, probably the more they're hiding behind. So when somebody comes up, like, here's a great example. You invite somebody to a party and they're like, yeah, no, I will totally be there. I'm certainly going to be there. You know they're not going to show up. The bigger the front, the bigger the back. The beauty, though, is when you come in curiously and you're watching, listening, noticing the subtleties, is that when somebody's saying one thing and you can feel something else, then you can drop in gently into that space and go, is there something more that you'd like to share? Is there more here that you want to communicate? I'm open to hearing it. That's another big piece, actually. Safety. To effectively listen and to be effectively heard, we need safety. We need a container, right? A lot of times we walk into communication and conversations without setting the container. Or we set an assumed container. How many of you, especially in relationship, have had your partner message you and go, hey, can we talk? Look, I can see it in the face. You're like, those are those terrible words. So that's what I mean by an assumed agreement or intention, is that immediately we have our own story. We're like, oh my God, they're going to leave. This is it. They're mad because I took that cake. But that's assumed. And so you have to actually communicate your real intention and an invitation into the conversation. So you step in, you go, hey, I'd really like to talk about this because this is important to me and I would like this out of it. Is that something you're open to? And if they can say yes, which I can almost 90% of the time guarantee, they will say yes out of curiosity. Because even if they're not really ready, if they're like, well, I was really avoiding this conversation, but okay, now that you brought it up, see, you gave them permission. And then you drop in with a safety of a container. Because now you've both agreed to be there. Otherwise, that's called an ambush. If you don't do it that way, you just literally attack the person. You came out from behind a shrubbery. You're like, ha! Listen to me. Doesn't work so well. Now, it doesn't have to be in the extreme of a emotional kind of conversation. It can be something as simple as you walk up and go, hey, do you have a moment? I'd just like to ask you something. That's asking for the permission. And it's an invitation. And if there's a yes, there's an agreement, now you have a container. So effective listening can only really happen when both parties have agreed to actually be there. Otherwise, normally what you have is one person speaking, the other person trying to escape. And now this comes back to, though, this idea of can we be actually clear about what we want? And if we're not clear about that, because most of the time we're very clear about what we don't want. And if you come into a conversation being like, okay, now I want you to stop doing this, you're not going to get a good, safe container. But if you come into a conversation saying, I would really love this for us, that's very different, right? When I came out of my second year in silence, somebody asked, what are you going to do next? And I said, bold honesty. And it kind of just came out of my mouth. I was like, oh, crap. And they asked, well, what does that mean? Are you just going to go around and tell people everything that you're thinking and all your opinions? I said, no, I'll get beaten up. That would be dumb. Bold honesty doesn't mean you go and you tell people what you think of them. Bold honesty means you vulnerably share what you're feeling. And that's the same thing in these kind of conversations. If we want to be heard and we want to really listen effectively to one another, then we have to come in there vulnerably, not with opinion, not with judgment, not with agenda. Leave those things aside. Go in with intention, which is to clearly communicate, this is the reason I'm coming into the conversation. Invitation, will you come in for the same reason? And then curiosity, be like, you go first. And we get to effectively listen. Probably another big piece of effective listening is, I don't want to call it faith because that's a bit of a religious aspect, but let me redefine that a little bit. It's an obedient trust in the moment, which is actually the definition of faith. It's an obedient trust, right? And what that means is you step in there, because a lot of times, I know I'm guilty of this, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to go into the conversation, I'm going to let them speak first, I'm going to really fully listen, I'm going to take it in, and I really hope I'm going to be able to express what I need. Well, that desperation, that piece of you that's like, okay, are they done yet? Like, I have stuff to say too. That will limit you from actually listening. And so you have to have faith. That a lot of times you may not even have to talk. That they may say the exact thing that you were wanting to share too. You have to have faith and trust that whatever transpires in that conversation, it isn't about who says what, who's right or wrong, but rather what truth is revealed. Because that's what takes you to the next step. I think a lot of times we come into conversations really as a battle, a debate of right or wrong. I want you to think about that for a second. If you're battling to be right, then you're also battling to make everybody else wrong. Did you guys hear that? If you're battling to be right, then you are also battling to make everybody else wrong. To have somebody agree with you is that they understand the value it has for you. But it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. Right or wrong is such a subjective thing. And whenever we get into a right or wrong conversation with people, then we're in a battle. Which means that you're not going to get an agreement, you're going to get a succession or a surrender. And it's very different. And that's why I say you walk in there with the trust, with the faith, that it's not about that one or the other is going to walk away being like, ha, I got my way today. But rather, you're going to walk in there and be like, we found clarity today. We understood each other. We got a truth. And now we have something to move forward with as a team. That's another big piece right there. You are a team. If you come into a conversation thinking that you're opponents, then you're going to be doing the battle, right? But if you come into a conversation going, we're on the same team after the same goals, you'll have a remarkably different result. To effectively listen to others, we must learn to effectively listen to ourselves. And a lot of times, I think the reason we avoid that is because over our lifetime, we've ignored ourselves a lot. And that ignoring didn't mean that the voice, the message, the expression went away. We just pushed it down. And so then it became something like that small child that's tugging on your pant leg going, hey, 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 hey. And you're like, shh, no, I'm busy right now. Shh, no, I can't, shh, shh, shh. And finally you're like, what? And they're like, nothing. Because all it needs is acknowledgement. That's it. All it needs is acknowledgement. It's the same thing with anything else that's going on inside you, any voice or anything that you're listening to with somebody else. In the moment we acknowledge, and this will be very key, I think a lot of the women in the room will probably agree with this. Do you find it more valuable when a man listens and acknowledges, or when a man listens and tries to fix? Right? 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 Because within us, we have both the masculine and the feminine, right? The masculine wants to fix. It's a problem solver. The feminine within us just wants to be heard and acknowledged. That's it. And especially when it's emotion that's coming up, the emotion is that part of us that's fluid and moving. That's the feminine part. All it wants is the acknowledgement. So now let's look at that when you're feeling that within you, right? You feel that emotion coming up, and you're like, no, it's too much right now. I can't deal with it because I can't solve it right now. Oh, that was your masculine thinking that it had to do something, when actually all that needed to happen was you acknowledge it. I see people do this all the time where, emotion will come up in an inconvenient moment. You're in a cafe or a public place, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm okay. And then you go home thinking, okay, I'll deal with this when I get home. And you get home, you're like, okay, now. You were there before. Because emotion doesn't go by the masculine schedule of when you want it to happen. It is in the moment, expressing authentically. Now, what the masculine part of you can do is it can listen curiously. And you go, oh, right now? Okay, what's going to happen now? And it's amazing. It'll come up, it'll go, and it's done. I used to find it remarkable with one of my previous partners where she would have the biggest emotional outbursts. And I would sit there and I'd hold the space as best I could and be like, and when she was done, she'd walk away. I'd kind of walk away, kind of decompress a little bit. And for the next 3 days, I'd be in my head thinking about it, being like, what the hell was that? Did I do something? How can I fix this? What should I do about it? How can I avoid that ever happening again? And for her, the moment she walked away, she was done. She was good. That's so unfair. Because at the time, I didn't understand what happens between that masculine and feminine dynamic. The feminine part of us just wants to express, be acknowledged, and it's done. The masculine will want to work something out with it if it has to. And so that's the thing, and this is part of the effective listening, is if you walk into a conversation from a assertive masculine, like, okay, we're going to get this done, I'm in control, I'm the master of this, this is going to happen, we're going to make it right. Well, back to right or wrong. Then you're probably not going to listen and acknowledge. You're going to listen to only enough to think of how you can fix it. When actually, there was never a problem, and that would have come through if the whole expression had been allowed. And that brings us back again then to faith. Just trust that you're going to walk into that conversation, into that interaction, into that connection, not to prove something, not with an agenda, not to even point out something or say something, but to discover something that could only be discovered by both of the parties listening. I mentioned that I used to interact and react maybe more from a masculine side of judgment, wanting to fix, problem solve. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a very useful quality. And it's the masculine within all of us, right? And how did I transition, is your question, to be able to listen without judgment? A big piece of it is curiosity, and another one is acceptance. The acceptance part is to say, yeah, I still judge. We don't get rid of things, we integrate them. And so knowing, while I'm listening to somebody, there might be a little voice that comes up and is like, they are crazy, right? But then another little voice goes, yeah, and let me honor that crazy. Let me honor that right now, because that's what's happening right now. I accept what's the reality in this moment. And then just listen. With curiosity rather than judgment. You see, judgment would be like, judgment, by the way, means that you are comparing things. That's all it means. It doesn't mean good or bad. It just means you're comparing things. And so if you're looking at somebody and you're hearing something and you think they're crazy, it's because you have a comparison as to what's not crazy. But maybe that same exact expression in a different environment, venue, or situation wouldn't be seen as crazy. So it's all perspective. And so you get out of that whole idea and you just go, let me be curious about what's here. Because that curiosity will do two things. It's curiosity of listening to what's happening outside you. And as Cyrus said, curiosity to notice what's happening inside of you. Without judgment. Curiosity cannot have judgment. And so then you notice something come up. You're like, oh, look, I'm comparing, I'm judging. I think they're wrong about this thing. I really want to make my point right now. I need to fix this. We can't have this going on. And you notice all of that happening inside you curiously. You don't judge it. If you go, oh, that's terrible, you just gave it a little more charge. It's like a little electric shock. It gets bigger. If you don't give it any of your energy, but you just acknowledge it, then in that acknowledgement, in the same way that if you're acknowledging the person outside of you, it dissipates. These three words, I don't know, and the value that they hold. And I think I don't know is a future thing, right? So present, you know, because you can feel it, you can be in it if you're present. Past, you knew. But then it kind of changed because your stories will change in your own head and stuff. So you knew it, but now it's gone. Don't even worry about it. Present, and then there's this thing that we do in the future. We go, but wait, in the past something like that happened. So what if it could happen over here? I think I know my future. People ask me often, what's fear? And normally we say that fear is the unknown, but I actually think fear is the projected known. Yeah. It's the projected known. It's you thinking you know what's going to happen and preparing for it. But as you just said, three magical words, they're like a ninja strategy there, where you don't know. You don't know. This idea of not knowing, what that does is it gives you, again, that gap, that pause, because you go, oh, let me not react because I can't. Let me instead respond. To have the ability to respond is to be responsible. Notice how I just changed that word, because I think normally we hear the word responsible or responsibility, and you're like, that was what my parents said when I was responsible for my chores. Or I'm responsible for that debt, or I'm responsible for this and that. We take responsible, we think of it as a blame, a burden, some duty that we have to do. But the real word, it means the ability to respond. And so wouldn't you rather have that ability? It's a very strong ability to have. But normally we only have the ability, or we are practicing the ability to react instead of respond. A reaction is a repetition of an action, which means you're taking your past because you think you know what the future is going to be, but because you can't actually know what the future is, because you really don't know, then what your mind does, because your mind is programmed to help you survive, right? And so what it'll do is it'll be like, okay, what did we do before to survive? Well, then the mind will ask a question. It's like, but to survive for what? What's the threat? I don't know. I haven't gotten there yet. Okay, we'll give you all the tools then. And so every single possible, preparation you could ever have, every fear, every, anxiety, tension, protection that you could ever have, you take that and you're like, okay, I don't know what's happening in the future, so just in case, I'll put all of this here. But you come into those magical words, I don't know. And all of that gets wiped away, and instead you can place curiosity in its place. So to summarize, we have this art of effective listening, and it means to first listen internally within yourself. Notice what's the conversation. What is it you're desiring? What do you really want in the interaction or conversation? And have you given yourself permission to express it? Now, once you know you have that permission to express it, that's like giggling in an inappropriate time. Just let it happen if it's natural. And then with that same permission, you go into the conversation with somebody else with curiosity. You leave judgment behind because that was in your past. You can't judge something if you can't compare it. You can only compare it if you have a past comparison to do it to. So you leave that behind you. You step forward into the future, and instead you approach people with this curiosity, which means to be aware and ready in that moment to respond. And now you can listen not just to their words, because sometimes, like somebody like me, they may be silent, but rather you're listening to everything about what they're expressing. It might be their body language, it might be their eyes, it might be an emotion. A lot of times, especially if you're having a huge emotional outburst, the words are inconceivable. You can't hear them, you don't know what's being said, but you can tell what's being felt. Right? And so we feel into one another, and that is effective in our listening, because then we know what's behind the words. And then with permission, we can ask people, what is it that you want? What can I do of service? How can I support you in this? How can I hear what you really want to share? And all of a sudden, they have permission, and they might share it, and because they feel relieved and relaxed, because they finally were heard and acknowledged. Now you may also be, but even if you're not able to express what it is you wanted to, you may have found some truth in between. So thank you for coming and listening today.